All right, we're ready for our second study in Bible hermeneutics. I appreciate all the interest that you have shown. And just a little bit of trivia, we have received more hits on this on YouTube than anything we've posted today. So there's interest in this class for some reason, and hopefully that will continue. I remind you of our assignment. If you were not here last time, go back and go to YouTube and look for our class last week, and you'll see why this is important. What's the background behind this? But our, if I can get my remote to work, our challenge to read 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John some 50 times between now and the end of April. That's not hard. It takes about 15 minutes to read that, maybe 30. And so within 30 minutes, you can read the entire 3 books, and they're short. And so I encourage you to do that. Hopefully you're doing that and seeing some things. One of the things we pointed out last time is that we're going to try to keep 2 levels going through this study. There's going to be a basic level of study that we're going to keep going. Everybody can participate in that. And then we're going to do some deeper dives. And deeper, we're not talking about real deep. We're just talking about deeper than some would want to go. For example, we may stop and look at what a Hebrew word is or a Greek word. That's not all that deep. It's just going to be a little deeper than the basic level. So we're going to try to keep those 2 levels going all along. This you saw last time. I've rearranged the order a little bit. If you've copied that from last week and you say, well, that's out of order, I know that. And so I've added a little bit to that. But this is the basic level we're going to be looking at each time. And that is when I'm studying a text, it may be a chapter, it may be a verse, I go through this basic process of trying to determine what it means so I can either teach it or explain it or know it for myself. I'm going to take the text, I'm going to read the text, I'm going to read the text, I'm going to read the text. I'm going to start with the text and stay with the text for a while before I do anything else. Then I'm going to raise the question while I'm reading, what's the context? It may be a verse or 2 before, verse or 2 after, it may be the whole chapter, it may be 3 chapters, it may be the whole book. What's the context saying? I'm going to look for structure and thought patterns. We're going to call it that now. We're going to change the name of that a little bit later in another class, and you'll see why. But right now we're just going to call that thought patterns. Start watching for thought patterns, particularly in reading a chapter. Verses 1 to 5 seem to be talking about this, where it seems the different subject is in verses 6 to 8, and then maybe the next few verses are talking about another subject. Are you seeing thought patterns? Watch for that. You may change your mind on that. Check translations, because here's a difficult verse. Another translation may enhance my understanding of that, may change my view of that. And then we're going to look at some word meanings. Maybe what does this word mean? We did a little of that last week in talking about Galatians 1. And the real question is, what did it mean to the original audience? We're going to do all of that before we make any application to us today. We're going to stay on that basic level throughout. Now, I'm not going to spend much time here. Remember, we talked about inductive Bible study. This is where we let the text induce its meaning to us rather than us inducing the meaning into the text. And so here in inductive Bible study, there are 3 things we're going to do. There's observation. What does the text say? I'm not interpreting yet. I'm just observing. That's what we're going to do a little bit tonight, of observing. And then we're going to look at interpretation. There's 3 things I wanted to go over just briefly, number 3, 4, and 5, because we're going to talk about historical and contextual things a little later in our study. But we need to make sure that the passage is compatible with other passages, my interpretation that is, or what does the text actually have to say? Am I assuming things from the text? And then I'm looking for the clearest and the most literal meaning of that text. And we'll come back to application a little bit later. All right, here's where we are. We're going to talk about background and intro information. Background and intro information. So let's start with this. And our plan is, if you're wondering where we're going, I meant to say something about the handout or the questions. We probably won't get to Matthew 24. I don't intend to, but I'm prepared to if we get there. But we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 15. That was a passage left over from last week. We're going to look at that passage tonight, hopefully. And then Matthew 24 will be our assignment for next week. That's why you were not given questions when you came in. All right, let's talk about background and introductory information. And we're looking at 3 things: the value of it, the sources to be used, and the information that's needed. Let's talk about the value of introduction. Every class that I teach, you always can expect, if you've been here very long, we're introducing, say, the book of Daniel, that we're going to spend the first part of the class doing what? Introduction. Why is that important? Not on Daniel, but I mean just any book. Matthew, we're going to do an introduction. Acts, we're going to do an introduction. Revelation, we're going to do an introduction. Why is that important?
To establish context and the original intent.
All right, context, original intent. Anything else? All right, all right. I'd like to illustrate it with this. Those are good comments. It's like having a conversation with a person. Would you get much out of a conversation if a person just came up that you didn't have any clue who they were, and you start having a conversation with them and they start conversing? You don't know who they are, where they're from. You don't know anything about them. You don't know their background. They may be giving you some medical advice. You don't know if they're a doctor or a mechanic. You don't know. You don't know anything about them. So a little introduction about who they are, their background, and if I introduce you to them, this is my friend who's Dr. So-and-so, who has been in medical practice for years, and he's da-da-da-da-da-da, and I tell you all of that, and here's how I know them. Now the conversation means more to you, does it not? Because I've introduced that person to you. Same thing with the book. I'll never buy a book until I know something about that book. Secular books. I'm just thinking, forget about religious books. I read a lot about the Kennedy assassination. Every one I buy, I want a recommendation. Who has read it? What is his view? What is he saying? What's he defending? When did he write that? Did he write it in the 60s or the 70s or after 78? Or after 2022? When did he write? That has a whole lot to do with what he's saying. So I want to know all of that information. And what kind of reviews? What views do other people have? What was their impression of that? And then I'm ready to buy the book. And so here's the point. The more I know before I start, the better I'll be. Would you agree with that? So I know something about this book before I ever get into it. Now, their view of that, someone else's view, may be different from mine when I read it. They thought it was trash. I thought it was great. They thought it was great. I thought it was trash. I'm talking about secular books now, not biblical books, but there may be a different view. Now, here's the kind of things we're going to look for that's general introductory information. Don't have to worry about writing this down. We're going to write all this down in a moment. But this is the kind of thing that we're looking for to introduce a book. Before we read a book of the Bible, I want to know the author. I want to know who's the recipient, the theme, when it was written, where it was written, the general structure of the book. Like Hebrews, for example. If you've never studied Hebrews, we may have not really a good understanding of who the author is, but we can know who the recipients are, and we can know generally that chapters 1 to 9 deal with one thought, another thought in 10 to 13, and if we got that structure, we got a pretty good analysis of where we're going with this book, don't we? All right, we just did that. Same thing with Daniel. Daniel 1 to 6, 7 to 12. We've got that division. So we have a general structure of the book. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for. Now, here's something you do. You want to get your pencil and paper. I've asked you to bring that. You may want to write down some suggestions. I am not here. Let me footnote here. Throughout this series, we're going to talk about Bible study aids in another class. I'm not here to sell books. I'm not here to promote a bookstore. But I do want to suggest some things that may be helpful to you, some Bible study aids. We'll talk a little about that, but we're going to talk more thorough about it in another class. So, what are the sources? In other words, where do I get this information about introductory information? Because you say, well, I wanted to study the book of Acts. I started in Acts 1, and I read that, and I didn't see all that introductory information. All right, here's our sources. I might start with some commentaries. Now, we're going to have a whole class on proper and improper use of commentaries later. That's part of studying, part of Bible study. But suffice it now to say that what I call a standard, a full commentary, going to have general introductions. Some of them are quite weighty. If you read any of Dan King's stuff, his introductions are weighty, very weighty, but it's good stuff. There are others that have a one-page introduction, but usually a commentary. So I'm not suggesting you go out and buy 2 or 3 sets of commentaries, but there may be a commentary on Daniel that you want to buy, and it's going to have introductory information. Or you say, I want to get ahead for Ezekiel. Okay, you buy a good commentary on Ezekiel, it's going to have an introduction to that. But there's some others that are a little cheaper, and that is what I call workbook commentaries. They're workbooks, but they're brief commentaries. The Bible textbook series put out by Truth, those are pretty good commentaries. Some of them are weak, but some of them are pretty good. Most of Willis's, the footnotes are worth the price of the book. And a Harkwriter series, good brief commentary. He'll have some introductory information. I put my own name up there. I've written some for One Stone and some for Truth, like the one on Isaiah, the one on Colossians, the one on Hebrews, the one on Revelation, and it seemed like there's another one, Acts, in there, I think. And those were intended to be workbook commentaries. So those workbook commentaries, there's a world of them out there. Those have some introductory information. Bible handbooks. If you're not familiar with what a Bible handbook is, many of you have. You say, I don't know if we've got one. You might have Halley's Bible. That's not Haley. That's not Homer Haley. That's Henry Halley, not a member of the church, but he was familiar with the pioneer preachers, buried among them, in fact, at Frankfort, Kentucky. But that's a great introduction. A lot of introductory information. Henry Halley. Cost you about $25 to buy that. That's not bad. So you got Henry Halley, D. Hoff, George D. Hoff from Murfreesboro years ago. Some of you remember him. Basically, he gives a summary of what Halley has to say. There's another one called Nelson's. These you can go to your bookstore, whether it be Truth or Florida College or be One Stone. They'll have all of these. Those give good introductions to all of the books of the Bible. And so a commentary, say, on Daniel is only going to give you Daniel. But these handbooks will be very helpful. Workbooks are study books that give overviews. This is a great book here. It's called The New Testament Book by Book, still in print by Roy Cogdell. Takes every book of the New Testament and gives a summary of it and gives an introduction to that. It's a good book. These 2 volumes by Hoyt Houchin, many of you don't know, didn't know Hoyt. He's been dead for a number of years. Volumes 1 and 2. Volume 1 is Old Testament. Volume 2 is New Testament. Gives a pretty good overview. It's not a thorough, but it's a pretty good overview of each book of the Bible. Some of you I know have used Jensen, the little small series. It's kind of a quick summary, but it's in workbook form. And I like J. Sidlow Baxter. You may not be into buying a book that big, but you hear me quote from J. Sidlow Baxter, Explore the Book. Pretty hefty, but he has some pretty good introductory information. Gives you a good summary of the book before you get started. Study Bibles. Some of you use a study Bible. I don't use one. I don't like a study Bible. I like it for a reference, but I don't like it for my own Bible. So I'm not critical if you've got one in your hand tonight. It'll be very helpful to you. But if you want to know find what a good study Bible, do a search not for a Bible, but do a search in the bookstore or online for a study Bible. You want to do a search for, quote, study Bible, end quote. And you'll find things like the Open Bible. That's one. There are several others. That's one of the probably more popular ones. And what are you going to have in that? You're going to have some notes at the introduction of each book. So you open up to Daniel, and it's going to tell you some background to Daniel. Going to tell you the date to Daniel. Give you an outline of Daniel. Key themes in the book of Daniel. Same thing with every other book. Make sense? Now watch for this. Every study Bible I've ever seen, when somebody comes to me and says, what about this? It's almost always a problem with premillennialism. Watch for that. Watch for that. Be aware it's probably going to teach premillennialism. And so be careful of those. That's one reason I don't like those for my main study Bible. There are books that are called introduction books. I have a couple, and I'm leaving these on the front row. If you want to come up and look at these, Merle Tenney has one called The New Testament Survey. You hear me quote from Edward F. Harrison, Introduction to the New Testament. Those are kind of thorough introductions to the New Testament, but it's introductory information, the kind of things we're looking for. All right, so let me back up just a moment. Those are some sources that when I'm getting ready to study, say, the book of Romans, I might search through those and just look for information. I'm not locked in and married to any information there. Why? Say again? Those views are taken from men, and they could be wrong. So when they give the date, they could be wrong on the date. Their outline may be totally wrong, in my view. It may be that they're saying the theme is something. But generally speaking, if a person, for example, Barnes. How many of you have Barnes, have used Barnes? You ever used Barnes? Barnes is a Presbyterian. Barnes will tell you himself, and he's been quoted as saying, he thinks more of his scholarship than he does his theology. There are times he'll say, my theology says this, but really the text is saying this. That's what I want to know. Tells me he's dishonest, but at the same time, he's a good commentator most of the time. So by and large, on introductory information, you're not going to find much error there. You're not going to find much false doctrine in the introductions. But those are good sources. Those are good sources, and they're not real expensive. Let me plant a seed, and then we're going to try to grow this seed a little bit later. That if we're going to be good Bible students, let's come back to that. If I wanted to be a good fisherman, but I don't want to spend anything on fishing gear, what would you say about that? I want to be a good golfer, but I want free golf clubs, and I don't want to pay $20 for a driver. What would you say? Mitchell, you're a golfer. Not going to go very far. I want to be a mechanic, but I don't want to buy those tools that you fellas buy that are expensive. I'm not going to do that. What do you say? Get what you pay for. My point is, I want to be a good Bible student, but I don't want to spend $25 on a Bible study aid. But yet, if we fish, we buy and we spend. If we golf, if we have sports, we do anything else. We've got DirecTV, we've got the internet, we've got the $1,000 phone, we've got 2 or 3 computers, but we don't want to spend $30 for a Bible study aid. Think about that. We're going to talk about Bible study aids a little bit later. All right, let's talk about the information we're looking for in introduction. And so I want to get through this quickly because I want us to get through to 1 Corinthians 15. We hope to have some time for that. But this is important information. By that I mean to get introductory information. One of the first things we're looking for is the author or who is speaking. Why is that important? All right. It makes a difference who might have written that information when he talks about himself particularly. So I want to know the author of the book. I don't always know that. I cannot know for 100% certainty who wrote the book of Hebrews. I think I know, but I don't know 100%. I think it was Paul. You may think it was someone else. That's fine. But there are books that I do know without a doubt. I know John wrote John. I know that. I know John wrote Revelation. And so when he speaks of himself in first person, Daniel does that. That makes it very important. It may help me understand something that was said. Knowing, for example, that Luke was a physician helps me to understand why he describes the fever of Peter's mother-in-law differently than the other writers. When he talks about leprosy, he talks about it a little different than the other writers. When he talks about the needle, he uses the term for a suture needle. That helps me to understand that, knowing who the author is. When I see the personality and the style, Paul was more argumentative style, debater style. That if this is true, then this is true, and that proves your doctrine to be false, kind of thing. Some people don't like argumentative. Well, then I'm sorry, Paul's argumentative. That's just the way he is. But John was a writer of contrast, love versus hate. And if you're reading 1 John, you're seeing those contrasts, darkness versus light, that kind of thing. All right, but let's continue on the author. I want to know who's speaking in the context. For example, Moses wrote the book of Genesis. I got that, but he didn't say everything in Genesis, did he? For example, I want to know, is somebody being quoted like the devil was quoted in Genesis 3? Matthew quoted the devil. So there's some things in Genesis that are not true. You shall not surely die was not true. That was a correct quotation, but it was a false statement. So I need to know who's speaking. That's quite simple. We knew that one. Job's wife. Who said curse God and die? Well, the God didn't say that. That was Job's wife that said that. Or what the fool might say, or what the lying prophet might say. Now, this is going to be important in biblical interpretation. Get this point. You may not agree with my view of John 5. I don't have time to go into John 5. I'm just going to assume that you agree with me. Let's pretend that you do. But I think John 5, for example, let me tell you what John 5 is about. It talks about the man who wanted to be healed and he said he couldn't get in because the angel came down and stirred the water. There's some textual issues as well as other issues with that passage. I think that is saying that's what the people thought, not what actually happened. So there may be a quotation or a reference to something that people believed, whether it was true or not, just saying that's what people believed. We'll talk more about that toward the end of our study. So I want to know who they're talking. Are they saying God said that or an apostle said that? Or is the text saying that's what the people believed? I want to read that carefully. I may be assuming some. All right, now I know who the author is and who's being talked to. Why is the recipient important? All right, what big deal about that?
Well, you speak differently to different audiences. You don't speak the same way to a child as you do an adult. You don't speak the same way to someone who's educated versus someone who's not. You wouldn't speak the same necessarily exactly to a Jew or a Gentile. Knowing who the recipient is can help you understand what's trying to be.
Very good, very good. I want to know the recipient of the book I'm studying, Romans, for example, or maybe the book of Acts, or whatever book it may be. Is it a Jewish audience like Matthew? That explains to me why Matthew talks about Jewish things and never explains what they mean, because his audience knew. But Mark takes time to explain because he's writing to a Gentile audience. Make sense? So knowing the audience, the recipient, who the book is about. The individual, where some are written to individual, that helps me to understand, such as Philemon and Titus and Timothy. Some are written to a church, some are written to churches. These are the general epistles, like Galatians or 1 Peter and 2 Peter and James. But not only do I want to know who the recipient of the book is, might want to know the point, the recipient of a point or a section of a passage. For example, taking the oversight of the church was stated to elders, the context tells me. That wasn't said to anybody. Or like in Acts 1 or in John 13, there were statements made to the apostles that didn't apply to everybody else. So me knowing that in the context, who is being addressed, has everything to do with my interpretation, doesn't it? So I need to know who's being addressed in that context. Or like Romans 7 is addressing the circumstance of the alien sinner. When I make that describe the Christian, then I have bought into Calvinistic kind of concept. All right? That's one of those difficult passages. Or the passage talking to the erring Christian that repent and pray so that you would be forgiven. That's talking about the erring child of God. If I get mixed up on that, then I'm going to tell this non-Christian, you just repent and pray and God will forgive you. I need to know. Does that make sense? Not only who wrote the book, but what that particular section. Now, why is the point or the theme of the book or the message of the book important? Why do I need to know that or get an idea before I get started? Because I can figure that out maybe not. But I think I can if I read the book. Why is that important?
What the message supports the main ideal. If you know the main ideal, you're expecting to read a certain, I guess, support material for it.
Okay.
That gives evidences of the main ideal.
Of the main concept. Now, I may disagree with other people's thoughts. I may go through some of my Bible study aids, and they say the theme of Philippians is joy in Christ. I can see where they get that. But as I study that, then I come to the conclusion that it really has more to do with commitment to Christ, and joy comes as a result. So don't wed yourself to any of this information that you're going to get. Does that make sense? Don't wed yourself to that. Because you may change your mind on that. You may, before you get through, decide Daniel is not about God rules in the kingdoms of men. You're going to have a hard time convincing me it's not, but at the same time, I'm willing to listen to that evidence. Because I may change my mind on some things. That's why, let me footnote here. All this kind of information ought to be written in the margin of your text. And you're going to always write it in pencil. Why? Might want to change your mind. I have multiple times. When Michael was with us, I had some good outlines on 2 Corinthians, and we studied together, and he would present his, and then I get my eraser out and go to erasing. I like yours better. I changed my mind, and you may want to change your mind. All right, I'm going to start watching for that. Here's some examples. Ezekiel is about that you should know that I am the Lord, and I'm Jehovah. And we'll see that over and over again. Daniel, God rules in the kingdoms of men. 1 Peter, I won't get down here in interest of time. Be holy in all of your conduct. I see that over and over and over through the book. And that's what the book is about. When I understand that before I go into that, now this starts making sense to me. Does that make sense? All right. I want to know what the theme is. Just like buying a second book. What is the point of the book? What's he trying to say in the book? And then I'm interested in reading. All right, I want to look at some history. That is when some things took place. And I'm going to quickly just mention, because we'll come back to this in future studies, I want to know some general history of Bible times. I need to familiarize myself with that. I know what the Assyrian rule is, the Syrian period, the Babylonian period, the Persian period, the Roman period, because that has everything to do when, for example, Daniel is fitting under the Roman and then the Persian period, New Testament under the Roman rule. So I need to know that kind of general Bible history. the background history to the Bible. But I also need to know general Bible history. What was going on in the day of the patriarchs, the days of the judges, the day of the united kingdom, the divided kingdom, the exile and post-exile. So are we talking pre-exile period or exile, like Daniel's in exile? Ezra, Nehemiah in post-exile. Haggai in post-exile. So I want to know general Bible history. I want to know where this all fits. So I want to know where this book fits. Because I come to the book of Job after I've studied all the Bible history, and I get to the book of Job because it's in a different section. It's not in Old Testament history. It's in the poetry section. Why is it in the poetry section? For the same reason the dictionary is in the dictionary section, because Job is poetry. That's the answer. That's why it fits there. But where does he fit in history? In the patriarchal period. He fits way back in the... So my studying the book of Job is really going to be enhanced if I know where he fits. He fits closer to the time of Abraham. Does that make sense? So then I read Ezra and Nehemiah, and I may study them before I study Daniel, but they come after Daniel. In fact, we've already studied them in our survey, haven't we? But they're in the post-exile period. So I need to know that. Daniel is in exile. I might want to know which Herod is being talked about because of the history. Is the Old Testament still in force? What was the era going on at the time? Is this Gnosticism or is it Judaism that he's dealing with? Those are introductory information, pieces of information that I may need to know. Why is geography important? A little bit of geography. Good point. Yeah, it looks like a conflict. And so if you didn't catch what she was saying, that may say he went up to Jerusalem when he was actually going south. It means he was going up by way of the hills, going up to Jerusalem. For example, I might need to access some maps. And you can say, well, I don't have maps. You may have some in the back of your Bible. You can find some on the internet or your Bible program. If you've got a Bible, many of you have a Bible program, you probably have access to a world of maps. If you have Logos, you probably have access to a world of maps. Accordance has that as well, if you've got that. It has a world of maps, more than you can ever look at. I need to know cities and nations and rivers. In other words, I need to know where Babylon is. I may need to know where Egypt is. I may need to know where a river is because a river is referenced in the Jordan River. Where is it? I may need to take a look at a map. And here's how that helps. For example, Acts 1 and verse 8 talks about the spread of the gospel. Somebody tell me a summary of Acts 1 and verse 8. The gospel is going to begin Jerusalem, then into Judea and Samaria, and then to the uttermost parts of the world. I need to know where Jerusalem is, Judea, Samaria, and where the uttermost parts of the world are. That helps me to understand Acts. Make sense? All right. The life of Christ. We're going to talk about in the life of Christ the Galilean ministry. Where is Galilee? Where is Perea, the Perean ministry? The Judean ministry. Where is Judah? And so I need to know some references. Babylon was said to come from the north when they invaded, but they were off to the east. Well, Bible geography helps me to understand the Fertile Crescent they had to come across. They didn't come across the desert. Make sense? So that's going to help me when it talks about the nation coming from the north. Where is the location of places like Sinai? Quickly, I'll mention the customs of the time. I don't necessarily need to know this going into an introduction of a book unless the book heavily rests on customs. But I may need to look at customs like what the Holy Kiss is. What was that? And maybe the washing of the feet. The customs of the time, I'm going to quickly move from that. Like the washing of the disciples' hands. They failed to do that. What was that the Jews were insisting? Let's talk about type of literature. Why is this important? Before I study this book, I want to know something about the type of literature it is. All right, very good. It will. I want to know, is it history, like Genesis and Acts? That's pretty simple. Biography, like or autobiography, like Matthew or Esther. Those are just samplings. Poetry. That helps me to understand why Proverbs is written the way it is, or Ecclesiastes, or Song of Solomon is written in the style that it is. It's not written in historic fashion. It's Hebrew poetry. Wisdom literature. Is it wisdom literature? Dealing with practical everyday living. Is it prophecy, like the prophets of Daniel, Amos, and so on? Is it a letter? And I'm more interested in number 7. Is it apocalyptic literature? What is apocalyptic literature? Figurative, yes. Written in symbols and signs. You'll see that in parts of Zechariah, parts of Ezekiel, parts of Daniel, and almost all of Revelation. Make sense? Some small sections in other books, but nonetheless, those are apocalyptic in nature. So if you've never seriously studied Daniel and you're with us on Sunday morning and we go rolling through the first 6 chapters, you say, this is great. The brakes are going to come on in chapter 7, I guarantee you. And they're going to squall in chapter 9. You're going to say, whoa, wait a minute. What is this? This is apocalyptic literature. It's not that difficult. It's just a different kind of literature. I want to know that before I study the book. Make sense? All right. Let's talk about another thing here. This is the last thing we'll talk about, and then we're going to 1 Corinthians 15. An outline of the book. Why is an outline of the book important? A general overview of the book. Why is that important? All right. The organization of the thoughts and the themes of the book. Now, these are going to vary. I'm going to find this in some commentaries. I'm going to find it in some of the Bible study books that we just mentioned, aid books, and they're going to vary. One guy has a 10-point outline of the book, another guy's got 2 points, another guy's got 4, and so how am I going to determine which one is correct? From my reading of the text and comparing it to others. Now, we'll talk about that more when we get to outlining. But they're going to vary. But here's what I want to suggest to you. When you're looking for an outline to get started with, and you may change this as you go along, look for somebody that has fewer points versus someone who's got major points. If someone takes a book and outlines it in 12 different points, it will not be as effective as someone that's got 2 or 3 points or 4 points in the book. Make sense? Like the book of Hebrews, chapters 1 to 9, 10 to 13. Pretty good. Daniel, chapters 1 to 6, 7 to 12. Those kinds of outline. Romans 1 to 8, 9 through 11, and 12 to 16 is no doubt everybody's outline on the book of Romans. That'll make sense. All right, questions or comments on introductory information? When I get this information together, and I know who the author is, and I think I know who the author is, and I think I know the recipients, and I might not put all of this information, but basic pertinent information I would find very helpful to write in pencil in the margin of my text. Why? So I don't have to look it up the next time? I do that almost every time we study. Somebody may ask me a question about a book, and they say, when did this happen? And I'll look back at the introduction over here. This was, at least I concluded the last time I studied it, was dated XYZ. All right? And I may even have some of the evidence written out there because this verse mentions XYZ. Make sense? That's very helpful. Or someone asked me, can you explain, well, this is in a section of the book of Daniel, and here's an outline of Daniel that I have written in my text. That's going to help me for my future studies. Any questions or comments before we go to our assigned problem text? All right, let's spend the rest of our time talking about 1 Corinthians 15:29. This is where we're going to spend the rest of our time. Next week, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 24. So here is our text, and our assignment on the passage was, what is the baptism for the dead? What is all of that about? So, I'm not just wanting you to blurt out answers to that. It means XYZ. I'm not interested in that. Because I hope you are of the opinion, you're not interested in me just saying it means XYZ without providing evidence of that. So, let's work through this passage in this sense. We're going to have to do some pretending that we've done some things real in the short period of time we have. But let's work through this. What are we going to do first? And we've been asked, maybe it's your child or your friend has asked, what is the baptism for the dead? And you're going to figure it out. What did you do first in your study? Read it. You read the text, but we want to look at the context, so we read the whole chapter. Did we just read it once? No, we're going to read it and we're going to reread it and we will reread it and we may have to read it again. We're never through reading it. We may stop for now, but we're not through reading it because the more we study, we want to go back and look at it again. I want to go back to my verse, not only read the whole chapter, I want to go back to my verse and read the exact wording of the verse several times. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. What's the next thing I want to do? I want to check some translations. Now, I want to come back to that. Let's just hold that. That's true. Something else I want to do. While I'm reading, I'm looking for something. All right? I want to look at things that may be repeated, things that are contrasted. But one of the first questions that we need to look at the context. So I want to know what this chapter is about. Is this chapter talking about, is it talking about what to do to be saved? Is it talking about the end time? Is it talking about the resurrection? Is it talking about evidences of the deity of Christ? What's it talking about? What's the subject? You tell me. The resurrection. Dealing with the resurrection of Christ. What else do we know about the context? He is addressing some false teaching, some who said there is no resurrection. So I read it and I reread it and I read it, and I'm getting the gist from my reading. He's refuting the error which says there is no resurrection. It's not hard to figure that out. So I've got that. So now I'm going to zero in. So let's just pretend we spent a lot of time reading and we've got all of that information. Now I need to zero in on my section of verses, say verses 29 to 34. So what is he saying in 29 to 34? I still don't know what baptism for the dead is. And I'm just gathering information now. What am I looking for in 29 to 34? What am I seeing, rather? He's asking a basic question.
There is no resurrection.
Yeah, if there is no resurrection, then basically, why do you do what you do? In other words, here's some things that are inconsistent with that doctrine. For example, why are some baptized for the dead? Whatever that is, I hadn't figured that out yet in my study. So let's pretend we hadn't figured that out. I'm trying to figure that out. But why stand in jeopardy every hour? I understand that one. If there is no resurrection, then why put your life on the line preaching the gospel or living the Christian life? Why do you stand in jeopardy every hour? Or why do we fight and resist against evil, verses 31 to 34? I got that. So basically, he's listed three things. I'm seeing this I haven't gone to another translation yet. I haven't looked up any word yet. I'm staying right here in the context. I'm learning this from my reading and my reading. Yeah. Over and over. Exactly. So I'm seeing he's raising the question, why do you do what you do? These events, baptism for the dead, standing in jeopardy every hour, and fighting and resisting evil, suggested someone believed, whoever that was that did that, believed there was something beyond the grave. Or else why did they do that? It's also important to point out this, which I don't have it on the screen. The subject matter in the context is not about baptism. It's about the resurrection. His point is not to enlighten us about baptism, though it may, but to enlighten us about the resurrection. Context. Now this is still surface level. Now remember we talked last time that on the surface you're going to stay in the boat if you're going to stay in the surface level. Some of us may dive down a little deeper. We're all still in the boat with you now. We hadn't left the boat. We're at the surface level. We're just in the context. Making sense? Still hadn't figured out what this baptism for the dead is. Now what else do I need to do? Mark mentioned it. Let's go with Mark's suggestion. Look at other translations. All right? So let's pretend we've had time, because we don't have time here to do all of that. And you can share some that you've seen. But let's pretend we've gone through all of our translations that are on the bookshelf or on our computer. And I found the English Standard, New Revised Standard says those who are baptized on behalf of the dead, and then at the end of the verse, baptized on their behalf. Now that sounds different from my translation. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's different. English Standard is well recognized. Now the American Standard and the NET are wooden translations. What does that mean? You say, I heard somebody say about wooden, and it's got leather on the back of mine. What does it mean, wooden? More literal. Yeah, it's more literal. That means it's stiff translation. American Standard and NET and the New American Standard said baptized for them at the end of the verse. Why are they baptized for them? Well, that sounds different, doesn't it? Bible study sometimes will confuse you for a little while. Would you agree? Now that confused me when I looked at that. But that's going to help me. All right? Now let's go a little further. Anybody have another translation that you found just enlightening on that passage? Let's talk about compatibility. Remember our compatibility rule? We're still at surface level. We're still in the boat. We've got to make my interpretation that I put of this passage compatible with other passages that I understand well. So I know baptism is for forgiveness of sins. I got that. And I can cite the passage, and you can too. I know I cannot be baptized for someone else. How do I know that? No examples of it. Never see where Peter said, repent and be baptized for someone else. Yeah, Bible repeatedly says every man bears his own guilt and you give an account of yourself. So I'll give an account, I can't account for someone else. So I know that's not what the passage is teaching. It is not authorizing, as the Mormons have interpreted it, that I can be baptized for someone else. Still don't know what it means, but now I know what it doesn't mean. Make sense? This is helping me. All right? Let's talk about two possibilities. The Bible Knowledge Commentary said, before I look at that, I'm going to take the time to do this. Bible Knowledge Commentary said there are over 200 interpretations that they knew of. I think that's probably a stretch because there's going to be some repeat in there somewhere. But M.R. Vincent said concerning this expression, that is baptism for the dead, of which there are 30 different explanations, there's probably more like it, are given. It is best to admit frankly that we lack the facts for a decisive interpretation. None of the explanations proposed are free from objections. I'm going to say amen to that. You may not, but I'm going to say amen to that. Now, let me present two possible interpretations, and we're going to learn something from this, hopefully. Let's start with this. It may refer to a right practice of baptism. In other words, baptism for the remission of sins that you have experienced, you've been baptized with. And it may be saying that these people were baptized in view of dying. Linsky thinks that. Summers, that's not Ray Summers, that's Daniel Summers, the old thunder on the right guy. Willis suggests in his commentary that he's asking, why be baptized? Is it to be among the dead? That's a little different view, but still talking about the right baptism. So it may be saying, why were you baptized if you didn't think that there is no resurrection from the dead? It's all arguing for the resurrection from the dead. That's what it's arguing for. And I've always thought that. But there's some things that pose a problem for me. Now that would seem to harmonize, though, before we leave that, with other things standing in jeopardy and resisting evil, because he seems to be listing things that we do. Let's go to the other possible view. It may be referring to a perverted form of baptism, kind of an ad hominem argument. You say, on what basis? The word for, this is where I'm going to get into a word study. I'll look the word up, and I'm not a Greek authority, don't have to be. I can just click on the word, and it shows me the Greek lemma. That's the dictionary form. That's what lemma means. It's the dictionary form of that word, and it tells me that word huper means on behalf of. Now that is posing me a problem just like the translations, but that tells me the American Standard, English Standard, NET were right in their translation. Now I'm getting confused. Some suggest that it may refer to a practice of being baptized on behalf of one who died without baptism, and that Paul's not giving his credence to that. He's not even giving a sanction to that, like John 5, the stirring of the water. Possibly, I don't know. And that he's merely showing an inconsistency. Now, notice the change in terminology. Look at verse 29. Otherwise, what shall they do who are baptized for the dead? If the dead do not rise at all, why then are they baptized for the dead? And then he turns and says, and why do we stand in jail? He changed pronouns. So which is it? My answer? You're exactly right, Stephen. I don't know. I thought I knew. But here's what I just learned from that. You say, well, this didn't help us with Bible hermeneutics. Yes, it did. Here's what we learned from that. This passage, now you may be settled on that. And you say, I am convinced that it's this here. Okay. There's going to be some problems with that. You say, no, I'm convinced over here with this other. There's some problems there. Vincent was right. Vincent nailed it. But here's what I just learned. We may not always settle on what a text actually means. Not every single verse. There's some phrases that I just have to say, I don't know. I just don't know what that means. But here's what I can conclude. I can know what it doesn't teach. I know it doesn't teach that I can be baptized on behalf of someone else. I know it doesn't teach that. And I know the flow of the context is still understandable. What he's saying is, if there is no resurrection, then why were you baptized? Whether it was a baptism on behalf of someone dead that was an illicit practice, why were some of them doing that? Or is he saying, why were you baptized scripturally in view of death? Whatever the argument is, it really doesn't make a difference. The point is that their baptism was inconsistent with the doctrine there is no resurrection. And I got that. I got the flow of the context. Make sense? Here's something else I learned, not on the screen. That in studying hermeneutics and in taking the hermeneutical principles and applying them over and over and restudying, I may end up changing my mind on something. Because I've had notes in my Bible where people have asked me about that passage and I've given a standard answer. Here's what it means. And I have a hard time making that work when I go back and look at the Word. I look at the translations and the change in pronouns. I'm having a hard time making that work. And so I'm not as convinced as I was that I know what it means. Does that make sense? So that's a hard lesson to learn in hermeneutics. You say, well, I am convinced I know what it means. Great. Help us. There are passages I can be dogmatic about. I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. I'm going to be dogmatic about the point. I'm going to be dogmatic about what it doesn't teach. I am not going to be dogmatic of whether it's talking about a scriptural or some foreign thing like John 5. That's one reason I mentioned John 5 earlier. Throw that principle out. Gary's been lenient and give me 5 extra minutes, so we're going to have to quit. Questions on that before we go? Matthew 24, another simple passage we're going to talk about next time.